Okay, so mayong buntag sa tanan. So, actually, hapon na karon recording in the afternoon. So, for this video recording, we will be discussing about donor tax. So, naman pa sa estate tax. So, this is the second transfer tax that we will be discussing and also the last topic for our finals. Okay, so allow me to share my screen. Okay, so I got this PowerPoint from Scrib again, and this was prepared by Mrs. Nelia Tomas, CPA LPT. So, and with reference to this book, The Business and Transfer Taxation, Principles and Application by Banggawan Rex B. Okay. So at least this has already been, there is already incorporation of the train law because this is 2019 edition. Okay. So donation. It is the gratuitous transfer of a property from one living person, donor, to the another. Be reminded that we have two kinds of transfer. One that is during the lifetime of the donor, and the second one is after the death of the decedent. So in this case, we will be discussing donation. Now, there are essential requisites of a donation. Number one, the capacity of the donor to donate, intention to donate, donative act or delivery, and then acceptance by the donee. So, pag sinabi natin capacity of the donor, okay, this simply means that the donor, the person owning the property, is already at the age of majority, and at the same time, naana siya capacity to enter into a contract. So hopefully, sa inyong obligations and contracts, you have already discussed the requisites of consent, okay, as a component of contracts. Na dapat na siya yung capacity to donate. Then number two, the intention to donate. There is that intention of donating. Actually, kaning number 2 and number 3 are correlated. Wherein, ikaw nga donor, you are giving out your property to the person nga imuhang atagan without any form of compensation. So, ginahatag nimo siya with that intention of not getting anything out of the generosity of your heart. So, nasa donative act or delivery. And also, there is acceptance by the donee. Sir, pwede din na, sir, dili dawaton sa donee. Of course, that is pwede. But, come on, let's be practical. If something of value is ihatag sa imuha, I don't know, wala ko makita nga rason. Unless na lang kung out of your ego, ayokong tumanggap ng any form of tulong, ayokong dili ko gusto ma-involve sa imong mga properties or what. So out of pride, out of ego, or out of self-respect. So ganun. But nevertheless, there should be acceptance by the donee. Okay. So formal requisites of a donation. So pag sinabi natin formal requisites, this is in relation to the form of the property or the form of the donation. For example, real property. So if we're talking of real property such as yuta, building, okay, the donation or the documents pertaining the donation should be in public instrument, meaning should be notarized. And when it comes to personal property or movables, cellphone, kotse, gadget, laptop, if the amount exceeds 5,000 pesos, it should be written. Okay? Dili kailangan notaryado ha. It should just be written. And of course, if the personal property does not exceed 5,000 pesos in value, then it can be made in an oral contract. However, for cases of intangible properties, patent, copyright, trademarks, okay, so mga intellectual property, it should also be in public instrument, written and then notaryado po. The acceptance of the donation of real properties may be made in the same deed of donation. Kaya syempre, pagkahatag sa property, well, nahanatay documentation na nahatag na ang property. But the one who will receive the property, kailangan niya i-process pa po na para mapangalan sa iyaha. So deed of donation, then separate public document. If the acceptance is made in a separate instrument, the donor shall be notified thereof in an authentic form, and the steps shall be noted in both instruments. An oral donation requires the simultaneous, okay, take note ha. Pag sinabi natin oral donation, natay gidonate, but there's no written agreement, or there's no written document. So, oral lang, storya lang, sabot-sabot lang. So, it requires that there is simultaneous delivery of the thing or the document presenting the right donated. Types of inter-vivos donation: direct donation and then indirect donation. So, direct donation happens when there is an express statement that the donor will be giving out a property to the donee. And indirect donation is walay express. Okay, it can be in the revocable or irrevocable types. Types of donors, of course, natay resident or citizen, taxable, or global donation. So pag resident or citizen ang nag-donate, taxable siya for properties within and without the Philippines. But if it's non-resident alien, only those properties na nasa Pilipinas. Under the train law, donation to any donee is now subjected to flat 6% tax. So dalit na lang kayo na siya, no? 6% na lang as compared before. Donor's tax. It is a tax upon the gratuitous transfer of the property between two or more living persons at the time of transfer, whether the transfer is direct or in trust and without regard to the type of property transferred. So basically, the donor's tax is imposed on the transfer. Okay? Kaya nga tawag siyang transfer tax. The transfer of one property to the other if the donor is still living. Nature of donor's tax: privilege, proportional, annual, ad valorem, national, and then revenue. So pag sinabi natin privilege tax, it refers to a tax that is imposed on a certain privilege. Unsa nga privilege? Privilege to transfer property. That's not right. A right ha? That is not a right but a privilege. Because even if na mga property na nakapangalan sa ato for the meantime, caretaker lang taan nila na. But in actuality, those properties are actually owned by the Republic of the Philippines. So anytime, pwede dyan na siya kuhaon sa ato especially if it is for public use. Proportional because dili siya fixed, no? Together with ad valorem tax, in a sense that the amount of donor's tax na babayaran mo will depend on the amount and the value of the property nga nadawat nimo. Annual tax, it shall be paid at least only once rather. And national tax, so ang mga donor's tax, ang mga payment nato na ginabayad in relation to donor's tax goes directly to the national government. Then of course, it's for revenue or fiscal tax. Okay, rationale of donor's tax. Number one, to control tax evasion of estate tax, control tax evasion of income tax. So, what does this mean? So, pag sinabi natin to control tax evasion of estate tax, there are certain instances manggod nga, how do I explain this one? Di ba? Pag mag-transfer ang property gikan sa namatay padulong sa iyahang mga heirs, magbayad ta dapat o estate tax. But what if before namatay ang decedent is nag-gift na niya, na-donate na niya tanan na iyahang property sa iyahang mga heirs? So walay bayaran ang katong decedent. Well, walay bayaran if wala tayo donor's tax. But because na tayo donor's tax, then dili sila ka-evade sa transfer tax. The same with to control tax evasion on income tax. So instead of payment, supposedly pag mag-transfer ta og property from one person to another with a compensation, kumbaga there is a financial transaction nga nahitabo. Ipalit ang property, ihatag, and then nagbayad ang buyer, and then ihatag ang property ni seller. So supposedly na siya income tax. But what if instead of baligya dito siya, baligya ang nahitabo, pero ang mga papers is regalo lang, donate lang. So kung wala tayo donor's tax, wala sila mabayaran. So since naman tayo donor's tax, then dili sila maka-escape sa maong taxation. So whether baligya nila, ihatag nila, donate nila, or matransfer after their death, magbayad yapon sila og tax. As to unsa nga tax, depende kung unsa jud ang nahitabo. Estate tax if the transfer was a result of the death. Donor's tax if the transfer is during the lifetime of the donor. And of course, if there is a compensation, an exchange or value, then subjected to income tax. Okay. So exemption, no? Exempt gifts. So sahon nato nino. So donation to certain, so kaning 1 to 11 discuss natin siya isa-isa. Donation to certain exempt donees under the NIRC, the new National Internal Revenue Code, and special laws. Donations to the following donee entities. So if there are certain donations to the following institutes, they are exempted. Okay, exempted sa maong donor's tax. So kamo na lang basaan ano. But basically, majority of this are charitable and non-profit organizations. Ako na ilhan lang diri kay kani DAP. I'm familiar with DAP, Integrated Bar of the Philippines. Na tay Philippine Red Cross. So basically, if a certain person donated properties, whether movable or immovable or intangible, to these agencies, then it will not be subjected to donor's tax. Donation for election campaign. Okay, during the last campaign, every time na ay bago lang po ako siya naibal na pag magdagan data o during the election, kailangan ta magpa-register sa BIR at kailangan ta magpabuhat og resibo. Sir, para asa ang resibo? Ang resibo is ihatag nato every time nga natay tayo madawat nga donation gikan sa atong supporters. So for example, natay angkol nihatag og 1,000 sa ato as a donation para sa ato ang election campaign. So, taga nato siya resibo. Okay? Taga nato siya resibo, naman tayo resibo, pwede nato sa 1,000, isuhan nato siya resibo, then ihatag sa iya. Okay? So, kato siya nga donation, although giresibuhan nato siya, that will not be subjected to any donor's tax. Transfer for inefficient consideration involving applies only to real properties subjected to 6% capital gains. So pag sinabi natin transfer for insufficient consideration involving real properties classified as capital assets, these are those properties nga gibaligya kunuhay nato but for a lesser value than its fair value. For example, the fair value is 20 million. Gibaligya lang nato, gipaulian lang nato 15 million. Ay katong 5 million. So katong 5 million dito, that is already exempted from the donor's tax. So katong 15 under the law, that is generally considered a donation. So mao lang to ang subjected for the donor's tax, and then for the rest it's the capital gains tax. Okay, general renunciation of inheritance. It occurs when an heir or a surviving spouse renounces. What does it mean? Murag gibalibaran. Okay? Wala niya dawat ang iyang share sa hereditary estate. So mo na siya. So renunciation by the surviving spouse, renunciation of her share in the hereditary estate, renunciation of his or her share in the net conjugal or communal property. So this is also exempted from the donor's tax. Donation with reserved powers. This pertains to the transfer of properties wherein ownership will transfer only upon the happening of a future event, which is specified by the donor, such as conditional donation, revocable transfer. A gift that is incomplete because of reserved powers becomes complete when neither the donor renounces the power or his or her right to the reserved power ceases because of the happening of some future event or a condition or contingency or the fulfillment of some condition other than those of the donor's death. So this happens, so this kind of exemption happens when there are donation nga na ay mga conditions. So dili jud siya absolute nga donations. So As of the moment, at the time of the donation, katong conditional nga donation, that will not be subjected to donor's tax because it was not fully transferred to the donee. But after the time that the condition will happen, so the temporary state or the term, basta the temporary state of the impartial state of the donation becomes absolute. That's the only time that it will be subjected to the donor's tax. And donation to government, so exempted po na. Donation to non-profit organizations, exempted po na. Quasi-transfer. This involves delivery of property to another but will never result in transfer of ownership. So there are instances wherein the properties are donated, quote-unquote donated, but it did not really result in the transfer of ownership because of certain conditions. So mura siya pareha, similar sa atong ganina, no? Katong na ay reserve powers, wherein you donate ang property, quote-unquote, you donate ang property, ikaw nagagamit, ikaw ang nakapahimulos, but it is not under your ownership. So therefore, there's no donor's tax because wala may transfer yun na itabo. Ikaw lang nagamit, you are, sa term to, ikaw ang naka-benefit or enjoying the fruits of that property but dili siya imuha. And of course, there are void donations. Invalid donations, those that are not subject to. For example, donation between spouses. Ang misis mo donate kay mister, si mister mo donate kay misis. That is not a valid donation, no? That is a void donation. Dili na siya counted. Donation between persons who were guilty of adultery or concubinage at time of donation. So let's say you have a property, ikaw, bana ka, nakaisawa, tapos nag-donate ka og property sa imong kabit, for example. So, kato siya, that is a void donation. There are 3 donations between persons found guilty of the same criminal offense, consideration thereof. So, pasabot ani that you are guilty of criminal offense na kay gimuhat niya that is against the law. And if mapamatud-an ang maong accusation, then the donation nga imuhang gibuhat shall be void. Donation to public officer or his wife, descendants, ascendants is okay. Basically, this is bribery. Okay? Nakay gidonate, nakay gihatag sa isa ka officer or politiko because you wanted the reason behind, the intention behind the donation is because nakay gusto mahitabo or makuha tungod kay siya ang nasa authority. So for example, mo donate ka kay mayor of certain property basta kay pasudlon niya ang business nimo diha sa iyahang lungsod. Okay? So naghatag ka og property but with the intention niya aprobahan ni mayor imuhang proposal na mag-business diha. So there is that ulterior motive. If mapamatud-an ang maong intention, then the donation is void. Donation to incapacitated person, take note ha, donation, ang mo donate dapat na ay capacity to contract. And also, the donee, the one that will be receiving the goods and the properties, shall be accepting. Okay, na ito'y last part ito nga dapat i-accept. So in the acceptance part, kailangan po ka na ay capacity mo contract. Kay mo perma man ka. Okay, you are actually, well, not necessarily mo perma because we have oral donation. But nevertheless, you also have the capacity to enter into a contract. That is why for incapacitated persons, mga minor, mga wala sa ilang sakto nga panghunahuna, they are not, donation to such persons are void. And donations of future property. Okay? Although there are certain instances nga na mga exemption ani, of course, but an example of this one is inheritance. Okay? Or something na dili pa nimo di pa nag-iyahan. Pag sinabing kasing future property, kana nga mao nga property even if padulungay na sa imuha. Okay? na ay ihatagay nga property sa imuha tapos ginabaligya na nimo. Let's say sasabihin mo nga, bay, namo ko madawat niya kuan ba, nakoy madawat niya yuta. Karong next year na ako madawat niya. Ibaligya lang nako daan sa imuha for 500,000. So dili na hindi baligya, i-donate na ako sa imuha rather. I-donate na ako sa imuha ang maong nga property. Pero next year pa, kay next year pa man mabot. So, that is not a valid donation in a sense nga you don't have ownership and possession of the property. Kay future property man siya. So, that is also void. So, sir, what if in next year niya, nakuha na dyan mo ang property? Katong giasaaran niya mo, sir, na ba siya katungod nga maningil sa maong nga property? The answer is no. Because in the eyes of the law, katong saad niya muhatag or i-donate is void. Donation with defects of execution, donation by a person who has no legal title to the property. Of course, pag wala kay legal okay kaniya, this is very discuss na lang nato ni siya no so, during sa class, but just take note of this one. So pag ikaw nga person, walay ang yuta, wala nakapangalan sa imuha, or ang property wala nakapangalan sa imuha, you do not have the legal capacity to donate such property. So nasa yung mga defects. Oral or written donation of real property or intangible property. Okay? So pag real property, okay, take note subayan nyo sa taas, kasi nakalimot mo. Pag real property, nipiyo ko no. For real property and intangibles, kailangan siya naka-public instrument ang donation. Therefore, well, it's not an issue of validity. Valid man siya. Pero in terms of enforcement, dito na tanay problema, no? Basta real property ganun, intangible, it should be in a public instrument, and then donation refused by the donor. Of course, kung gibalibaran niya ang pagdawat sa maong donation, then di mo na pwede ipamugos. Foreign donations of non-resident, donations of property situated in a foreign country, but NRA are not subjected to our donor's tax. Diba? Donation of property exempt under reciprocity. Okay, the reciprocity rule applies when ang atong mga balaod diri na example, how do I explain this one? They're foreigners. Okay, let's say an American. So the reciprocity rule applies if ang kaning maong Amerikano nga naa diri sa Pilipinas ma-charge nato siya sa atong taxation law if the same Filipino dito sa Amerika will also be subjected to that kind of law. Kumbaga, in simple words, if ang ato ang balaod is naa po dito, nag-exist po dito sa ilahang nasod, then that's the time that we can impose our taxation law. No tax shall be imposed with respect to intangible property donations of NRA donors if the donor at the time of the donation was a citizen and resident of a foreign country. And then B, the law of foreign country of which the donor was a citizen and resident at the time of the donation allows a similar exemption. Okay, so manit siya kung ingon, no? That there are certain, if naay ingani dito sa ilaha, then we can apply it sa mga foreigners na naadiri sa ato. Diminution of gift as specified by the donor. The donor may specify that a portion of the donation will be given to another person other than the donor. Okay, pwede na siya. Diminution is not exempt from donor's tax. Nevertheless, even if pwede na siya, that is still subjected to donor's tax. Taxable donation, donations that do not qualify. So basically, katong computation, atay computation afterwards, no? So same lang yapon, like gross gift, then naatay mga deductions, naatay net gift, and the net gift will be subjected to 6% donor's tax. Okay, let's proceed to the problems. Sample problems. Okay. Okay, take note muna. Exemption from the donor's tax is 250,000 pesos worth of gift during the year. And then excess of that subjected to the 6% cumulative for 1 year, regardless of the relationship of donor and donor. Okay, example. On 2018, na atay tulo ka donation. The first donation is a wedding gift to his daughter, 2 million pesos. The second gift to his father and mother, 1 million. The third gift is to his best friend, 500,000. Okay, let's compute first for the first donation. So 2 million minus 250, the taxable gift is 1,750,000. So 1,750,000 multiplied by 6%, that is times 0.06, that's 100 times for this donation. Next. Okay, kung napansin niyo ang gift na to, actually, baliktad din. This one. Okay. So, kung napansin niyo gidungag no ang gift sa iyahang anak and then gidungag pud ang gift sa katong iyahang mother and father. So, the 2 million sa ganina and then the 1 million, that's 3 million less the exemption. Kaya ang exemption man god dili na siya it's in annual ng 250,000 niya exemption. Dili na siya pwede nga kani nga gift minus 250, another gift minus 250 na pud, another gift minus 250. So, kanang 250 that is only good for 1 year. So, ang buhaton na to ana is 2 million plus 3 million. We have our gross gift of 3 million. Then less the exemption of 250,000. So, the taxable gift is 2,750 times 6%. That's 165 nga donor's tax due. However, since nakabayad naman ta og donor's tax nga 105, ang kulang na lang nato is the 60,000 pesos. The next. So, i-plus lang gyapon siya, no? 2 million na ito siya. This is 2, 1, 2. Okay. So, 2 million, 1 million, and then 500,000. So, that's 3,500,000 less the 250 exemption. We have a taxable gift of 3,250,000 multiplied by 6%. We have a donor's tax due of 195,000 pesos. Less ang atong nabayad na so far na 165 105 sa January, then another 6,000 pagka April. So 165. So ang bayaran na lang nato is 13,000 nga donor's tax due. Okay, now. So I'll just discuss this one, no? But will no longer go into the computation of this. When a property is transferred for less than an adequate and full payment, the difference is considered a donation. So for example, the fair market value of the property is 15 million pesos. Pero ang ipabayad lang nimo sa imong best friend is 5 million. Okay? So well, murag ginansyado ka, di ba? But sa atong balaod kanang if dili siya automatic, no? Of course ken na ay dapat mo reklamo, na mag-complain and ana and all. And if mapamatud-an nga underpaid by term ana, basta baba kayo ang imuhang gibayad sa imong property nga ginapalit, katong difference will be treated as a gift. So 10 mil na siya sale ang nahitabo, di ba? Sale ang nahitabo nga transaction, pero naay donor's tax tungod kay na ay dako kayo nga discrepancy sa fair market value and the selling price, which is in this case 10 million. So less the exemption of 250, there is a taxable gift of 9,750 times 6%, so 585 na donor's tax. Okay, and for this one, katong selling price ng 5 million subjected to capital gains tax of 300. Okay, so Mr. Generoso should be paying donor's tax of 585 and then capital gains tax of 300. So muna siya may tabo, no? If there is a price difference. Dili man sa all the time po, we actually do that. For example, ang sakyanan only pay, ang bayad yun ako is 350, but ang among gibutang sa deed of sale kay 100,000 lang para magamay lang ang bayaran sa abogado. So kato Nachoy, if we will be very strict about that, there is that 250,000 niya murag mahulog nga gift. Although gibayaran yun ako siya. So I guess that's it. So ang mahitabo ani, hopefully maka face to face na ta by Thursday, and then we will be having a quiz by then. Of course, mag-discuss at kadali, but if wala mo yung questions, then we'll proceed with the quiz. So, okay. Sa pa ba? Yeah, that's it. Pansit. Thank you so much and have a good day.